So what is a sole proprietor or a sole proprietorship? Well, in terms of business, that is a legal structure of a business. And there are many different types of legal structures. There's the sole proprietor, corporation, partnership, limited liability partnership. In the US, there's limited liability company, there's professional corporations. So there are a lot of different legal structures. But in this video, I'm just going to give a brief explanation on what a sole proprietorship business is. So again, the sole proprietorship is a form of legal structure. And I think some people think that a sole proprietorship business has to be small, but it doesn't. I mean, you could have 200 employees if you want and own different buildings and assets and stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be a small business, and it doesn't necessarily have to be limited to certain industries either. You could have plenty of different types of businesses in different industries that are registered or set up under a sole proprietorship as a legal structure. Now, one of the main characteristics of a sole proprietor business is that there's only one owner. You can't have multiple owners in a sole proprietor, hence the name sole proprietor, one owner. So if you're wanting a business with multiple owners, then I would look into something like a partnership or a corporation. And now the other important characteristic about a sole proprietorship is that there's no legal separation between the owner and the business. So the income of the business is the income of the owner, and so are the expenses, and there's no separate tax return. So for the individual who owns a sole proprietor business, they have to claim all their business revenue and business expenses on their personal tax return, as compared to a corporation where it's a separate legal entity and that corporation has its own tax return to claim business revenue and expenses. Now, the nice thing about setting up a sole proprietorship business is that it's generally the cheapest and easiest to set up and to maintain. And now one other important characteristic about the sole proprietorship, because it is not a separate legal entity from the owner, a lawsuit against the business is a lawsuit against the owner. There is no separation there. Whereas with a corporation, a lawsuit against the corporation is a lawsuit against the corporation and not necessarily against the owners of the corporation. And so unlike a corporation, a sole proprietorship does not have a formal share structures. You don't own shares in the company. Whereas with a corporation, you can own shares or have multiple shareholders. But in the sole proprietorship, you don't own shares. You can't sell them to other people. You can't take on other business partners. If you're starting a business and you're wanting to take on business partners either right away or in the future, then you won't be able to. You'll have to change that to a partnership or corporation or another legal structure that actually allows multiple owners. Another characteristic with the sole proprietorship is that you can't really sell it because it's so tied to you, the human entity. You can sell it in a way that you're selling off the assets of the business and maybe you're letting someone else take over the business name. But because it's not a separate legal entity, you can't really sell it in itself. Another characteristic of the sole proprietorship is that if the owner passes away, then the business discontinues because it is so tied to that human entity. Whereas with a corporation, it can continue on because it is a separate legal entity. So ultimately, a sole proprietorship is just a human entity that's engaging in business activity. Typically they're going to register a business name or a trade name to themselves, and then they can operate under that name. And again, it is the simplest form of business to set up and maintain and operate. Incorporating can be a lot more complicated for setup and maintenance. And another nice feature about being a sole proprietor is that you can actually register multiple business names or trade names to yourself. So I have Magnaltis Consulting where I do business consulting, but if I wanted other businesses as a sole proprietor, I could register those. I could register, Magnaltis Web Design or Magnaltis Photography or whatever I wanted. And those are all sole proprietorship businesses that are ultimately still tied to me, the human individual. And now when it comes to things like bank accounts and sales tax accounts, that's all tied to you, the human individual, if you own a sole proprietorship business. Whereas with a corporation, for example, those are separate. So the corporation has a bank account and sales tax accounts and the separate tax filing. It's not so connected to the human entity, the owner, like it is with a sole proprietorship. So hopefully this was a useful explanation. If so, please click like and subscribe to my YouTube channel here, where I currently have about 250 videos that cover business management and business startup topics.